I was about 22 years old at the time of this story, taking the bus home in a major city. The bus was pretty packed, so I didn't think twice about the guy who sat down in the empty seat next to me. He had long, greasy black hair, looked about my age, and I could smell alcohol on him as soon as he sat down. I had my headphones in and was actively using my phone, but he immediately started talking to me anyway. "Do you have Instagram?" I made a show of pulling out my earphones, hoping he'd get the hint that I wasn't looking to chat. I told him I didn't, which, of course, was a lie. "Yes, you do. I can see the app right there," he said, tapping his finger on the very visible Instagram icon on my phone screen. I was a little embarrassed that he had caught me in such an obvious lie, and I blamed that feeling for the incredibly stupid way I handled the rest of the interaction. He started telling me to add him, explaining that he's a famous rapper and skateboarder, insisting that I would love his videos. He told me to look him up by his name, Taylor Swift. Trying not to laugh, I asked him, "You mean like the singer?" He just glared at me and responded, "No, not like the singer." I wasn't sure how to react to that, so I told him I don't go on Instagram much, but I'd look at his profile when I got home. He then forcibly grabbed my phone out of my hands and proceeded to open up my Instagram app, look himself up, and add himself as a friend, all while continuing to rant about his rap career. At this point, I was starting to get worried that this guy might be insane, so I just tried to be as nice as possible, in case he turned out to be violent. I was sitting in the window seat, so he was blocking me from getting up and moving away. Still, looking back, I wish I had resisted, or at least made a scene when he took my phone. He handed my phone back to me and asked for my number. Stupidly, too intimidated from getting caught in my last lie, I gave him my real one. I insisted that the upcoming stop was mine, even though it wasn't, and exited the bus. Over the next few weeks, this guy would call me periodically, leaving me voicemails of his terrible, nonsensical raps. I couldn't help but laugh, showing some of them to my friends and joking about how I had met Taylor Swift the rapper. He also kept adding me to these group texts where he would ask if anyone wanted to meet up with him. The replies were always things like, "Dude, I don't even know you, stop adding me to these group texts." Maybe a month or two after this encounter, my roommate came home and told me she had some news. She's a yoga instructor, and one of her clients, another 20-something woman living in our neighborhood, had approached her to warn her about some local creep that had been harassing a friend of hers. Apparently, he became fixated with her after meeting her randomly on the street and started stalking her. She had to get the police involved after this creep shoved a letter through the mail slot in her apartment. It was full of nonsense and threats to find her and hurt her. As I'm sure you've guessed already, this weirdo referred to himself as Taylor Swift. Mr. Swift was caught by the police a few days later. It turned out he was a homeless guy who had legally changed his name to Taylor Swift. He was also in violation of his probation. He was a convicted rapist and had moved to our state without registering as a sex offender. After he was caught, the police raided his phone and found hundreds of photos he had secretly taken of women around our neighborhood, many of whom were only teenagers. He did some jail time for the probation violation, but was released pretty quickly. Because of his recognizable name and determination to be a well-known creep, I still see his exploits pop up on the news occasionally. Last I heard, he had taken up stalking women in a city about an hour and a half away from me. I guess it goes without saying that sometimes you need to forget politeness. Yesterday, I had a terrifying experience with an acquaintance of an ex-friend of mine. My mother was in Atlantic City, and my father and brother were out at a hockey game, leaving me home alone with my dog. My time alone in the house was pretty normal until around 6 or 6:30 in the evening when I received the first mysterious message. This guy messaged me on Instagram claiming I had insulted him. I was confused since I had no idea who he was, which I tried to explain to him. The next message I got from him said, "I'm gonna find you," which creeped me out a bit, but of course I assumed he was just trying to scare me. I called his bluff, but then received another message saying that I should keep an eye on my door for the next hour. Trying to debunk the fact that he could even actually find me, I asked him, "Fine, what's my address then?" He sent me my exact address and described my house and backyard perfectly. I dropped my phone and ran to my neighbor's house, not wanting to stick around and see if he was serious or not. I stayed there until my dad and brother got back from the hockey game. When I got back in the house, I checked my phone, frantically trying to explain what had happened to my dad. That's when I saw the most horrifying part. At 7:03, I had received another Instagram message with an image of this guy outside of my fucking house. We immediately called the police. I told them everything, but of course, since he never actually did anything illegal, there wasn't much they could do. Looking at the picture with them, we figured the kid looked around 14 or 15, so my family didn't feel all too threatened, although I'm only 13 myself. I realized at that point that he was wearing a backpack in the picture. I'm glad I hadn't stuck around to find out what was in it, or what he wanted from me in the first place. A few years ago, a random guy contacted me on Instagram. I thought he was cute, and he was pretty nice, so when he eventually sent me his number, we started talking on the phone pretty regularly. From the beginning, though, he seemed a little off. He wanted to talk way too often, and he would get angry if I didn't pick up the phone. Eventually, I just blocked him, but soon after that, I started getting calls from a different number. It always turned out to be him. I ended up blocking about 4 different numbers before the calls finally stopped. A few months later, he messaged me on Instagram from a new account, ordering me to send him nudes with the word slut written all over my body. Or else, he said he'd send nude pictures of me to my family, coworkers, and friends. I didn't understand what he meant. I knew he didn't have any pictures of me besides the ones that I would post on Instagram, so I decided to just ignore the message. About an hour later, he sent me an image. He had found pictures of a naked girl who looked very similar to me, but of course, since they weren't my own pictures, I knew that woman was definitely not me. I reverse Google image searched the photo and found the actual girl in the pictures, but I was still a little scared. We looked similar enough where he could have easily sent out this woman's picture and said it was me. While I could message everyone and let them know it wasn't me, I'm not 100% sure everyone would believe me. My family is pretty conservative, and I'm sure I'd be judged or even get in trouble at work if people saw nude pictures I was allegedly sending to strangers online. I went onto this guy's profile and immediately felt a cold sweat coming over me. Looking at the other profiles he followed, I realized that they were all people from my personal life. In a bit of a panic, I messaged the guy back with a threat that I would go to the police. Luckily, he deleted the threatening messages he had sent me and stopped responding. Just in case, though, I also deleted my public Instagram account and have since only been using my private personal account. I blocked his username on there too, and I just hope he never finds me again. Clearly, this will be the last time I give a stranger on the internet that much of my personal time and attention. About 2 years ago, I was admitted to a youth psychiatric facility to help me deal with some suicidal thoughts and behaviors. My experiences there were really helpful and good for me, other than meeting John. The staff and other patients were all really nice, and I even made some friends during my short stay, John included. The majority of the patients there, myself included, were female. I mostly hung around with John and 2 girls named Grace and Jane. We would eat all 3 meals a day with each other, and would usually spend our free time together as well. During this short period of time, we became very close. We barely knew each other, and knew that we would probably never see each other again once we left, but we shared this bond that I can't really explain. Jane, Grace, and I were all in the hospital to treat our suicidal thoughts and depression. Grace said she tried to overdose and ended up waking up in the psych ward. Jane never talked about the details of what happened, other than the fact that she tried to kill herself. John, on the other hand, was there for a very different reason. John never really seemed like he belonged in the ward. He wasn't depressed or suicidal, didn't have anxiety, nothing. He was very outgoing and was always smiling and joking around. We never saw him get angry or upset, and every day seemed to be pretty good for him. To me, he seemed completely normal. This obviously made us question why he was even there in the first place, so eventually I asked him. Of course, in the hospital, you really shouldn't be asking people why they're there, but we were all pretty close and usually didn't mind sharing our experiences with each other. He was pretty hesitant to answer the question and never really gave us a full response. We kept trying to get him to tell us why he was there, but he never said anything. I jokingly asked him once if he wanted to kill people. He looked me dead in the eye and stared at me blankly for what seemed like an eternity. His face was void of emotion, and he just nodded silently. There was something about the way he did this that I will never forget. I just knew he was being completely serious. Even so, quickly after his silent response, he burst out laughing and told us he was just kidding around. We all laughed nervously and then went back to our day as usual. I wanted to believe that he was just messing with us, but part of me knew that there was something very wrong with John. A couple days after this, the doctors told me I was ready to be discharged. I was the first of my friends to go, and while it was sad to leave them, I was looking forward to going back home. I said my goodbyes and never saw any of them again. Probably 6 months after my hospitalization, something started to happen. I was getting these weird, cryptic messages on social media. Some of them were almost threatening. Sometimes I would get them every day for a week, and other times months would pass without any coming in. The messages would almost always be in broken English and wouldn't make much sense. One of them said that there was a person who lived inside my house and would hide in my kitchen, and when I slept at night, he would float over me and watch me sleep. I didn't know who the messages were coming from or what they meant, but I was pretty scared. Randomly, some of them would be apologetic, while other ones would tell me I'm going to burn in hell. They were disturbing, to say the least, but I always tried to write them off as someone playing a prank on me. I stopped reading the messages, and eventually I stopped getting them altogether. At least, for a while. Everything went back to normal, and the harassing messages had stopped for a few months. I ride horses, and one of my horses had passed away, so I posted a picture of her on Instagram to remember her. Soon after that, I received a message that made me feel sick to my stomach. I saw that it came from the person who had been sending me creepy messages months prior, so out of curiosity, I decided to open it. It contained 2 links to a photo sharing site. The first was a photo of my mother's bedroom from back when the house was online for sale. The other was a decapitated horse head photoshopped onto the bed from the first picture. The image was heavily distorted and tinted red, and the caption below it read, "He's burning in hell, and there's nothing you can fucking do." I was horrified. Whoever was sending me these messages knew exactly where I lived, and they were getting even more threatening than before. I felt sick. I couldn't think of anyone who would send me something like this right after the horse I loved so much had died. There was one more link in the message. I didn't want to click on it, but I had to know what it was. As the website loaded, I saw that it was an entire album of pictures of me. There were over 70 photos, ranging from years ago to very recent. They were all taken from my Facebook or Instagram accounts, or from accounts from my family members. Any photos where I was with other people, everyone else's faces had been scratched out. The name of the album was my home address. I stopped using social media altogether for a while after that. I couldn't sleep. I felt like someone was always watching me. Just like the last time, after I got these 2 mysterious links, the messages stopped for quite a while. It was actually the longest time I went without getting one of these strange messages. About a year after that, I got a new comment on an Instagram photo of my dog. It referenced Caesar, the name of my dog who had died 6 years ago. Frustrated, I instantly messaged the account demanding to know who they were and how they knew about my old dog. The account was private and had 0 followers or posts. They left the message on read for a couple of minutes and then replied with a single picture. A picture of my bedroom. Finally, they admitted to sending me all of the messages from the past couple years and tried apologizing. I told the messenger that if they would just let me know who they were, I would finally speak with them. Of course, it was John. We messaged for hours on Instagram, and he told me everything. He couldn't really explain why he had done it, but he referred to it as the call of Satan, or just the call. I remember him referring to this a lot throughout our conversation. He would get these unexplainable urges to do whatever the call was telling him to do, and he couldn't stop it. He was extremely remorseful, but I couldn't find it in myself to forgive him. He was asking me to help him, but I told him it was clear that he was beyond my help. Finally, as the conversation came to a close, I blocked him. The worst part was that right before that he had told me, "You're not the first girl I've done this to." I hope I never hear from him again, and I hope he gets the help he needs.